So good afternoon to everyone. Third talk in our series on testing. This final one, I just wanted to bring over some specific stuff and pain points that I had over the years on snapshot testing, but also some of the other stuff. And just share a little bit of the setup and the extra tooling that we use in vet online booking, or stuff that I used before in VetPoint as well, which is the projects that I was working before. And yeah, I just wanted to start actually talking about something that we kind of ended last talking about, which is snapshot testing. So I did mention snapshot testing is, it does have some issues, it does have some problems and limitations. So the first thing that I can immediately think of is the initial size of our snapshots. So if we actually look at the snapshot that we have from last week, you see that even if it's a fairly small, fairly not really that complex of a page, it's already 160 something lines long. And here's the problem. The initial snapshot is something that you kind of have to go through. You have to look at yourself and maybe skim over to see if the HTML is correct, which is really not ideal. And to be honest, this is not something that I have a good solution for. There might be better ways to deal with it today, but I'll tell you my experience dealing with it in VetPoint. So when I started adding tests there, we already had a few pages developed. And the way that I was making sure that all those pages had the correct snapshot, because I was testing basically all of them at once, was I had to write some automation, some scripts to pick up the snapshot contents, this stuff here, save it into a file, and then open in a browser, just so that I could visually check if the HTML was correct. Again, not ideal. It does get much better once you have a stable code base, and then you have those snapshots as reference, but the beginning, not ideal really. One other thing that I did to remedy this issue is, if you see here, you see stuff like this, very vertically formatted HTML elements. And one thing I did in vet online booking specifically, actually in vet online booking, was to add this serializer. So Jest allows you to add custom serializers for snapshot testing. And as I mentioned last week, snapshots could be of anything, not necessarily HTML or React elements. It could be really anything. And you can create, again, custom serializers for that stuff. So this is basically just a series of regex, replace calls. No need to understand the specifics of this, but I will show you the effect of it. So if I run Jest with a -u flag, it will update the existing snapshots. And when I get here, you'll see a much more concise HTML. And this is, at least for me, a little bit easier to skim over and to see if there's any major glaring issues. So it's around 60 lines or so fewer in this case. And if you think about a truly complex page, this snapshot would be much, much larger. There's other little things that I do and done before as well to get those snapshots a little bit smaller. But again, it's just one thing that I had to do just to, it's a pain point, but it didn't really go away fully, but it's something that did help me a little bit. Another thing that this did help me with as well is, let's say, for this version of the snapshot, it was very common in VetPoint specifically. So let's say I'm changing this class here, and in my actual code as part of something related to a feature development, and I would expect this div, once I run the snapshots and the snapshot test fails, to see this line as part of the div only, right? But there was an issue most likely with Jest itself and the way it serializes elements with line endings, and it would show many of the other lines here as part of the div as well, even though they didn't change. That was horrible, very confusing. This stuff here, I don't know exactly why, but it did fix that as well. So that was another plus. And that's actually the second point that I had here. The default serializer can be a little bit confusing when you're reading the diffs between what's expected and what was received during your tests. There's an interesting story behind this third point here. So in that point, especially at the beginning of the projects, we had a couple of actual React front-end developers, but we also have one, sometimes two, guys that were more like designers, and they would usually develop like the JSX and the quote unquote the CSS for a new page, for example. So they wouldn't integrate anything, but they would give us the full styles for everything that the page needed. And it was very common for them, like after the page was developed, let's say they had to do a quick fix or maybe an update to the style guide or something. So let's say they change a button, the basic styles of a basic button. We were using styled components. And if you used styled components or other CSS and JS libraries, you know that they have these hashes here in place of the class name. This full class name is already something that comes from a Babel plugin, where you can add the file name and the component name to this, but it still keeps the hashes. The problem with these hashes is if you change anything on the style at all, even a blank space, the hash will change. And so your snapshot tests will fail because those classes changed. And the first few times I tried to help them, they would see that the tests were failing. They didn't know how to fix them. And I would look at their code and see, okay, so there's only style changes. That's fine. Let's just update the snapshots. Massive snapshot changes for their PRs and everything. And the result of that is that more than once, actually, they ended up introducing some bugs. So making changes that introduced bugs, unintended behavior. And because they were so used to running -u when running Jest, they would just update the snapshots and not even realize, for example, that a button now is not in the page anymore because they changed the logic slightly. And the second problem with that, because the snapshot changes, the diffs were so massive, during code review, we didn't really see those changes all that well. And so some bugs actually that ended up slipping into QA, for example, because we couldn't see what was changing in the snapshot and we couldn't see in the code review process as well. So there was this library called Jest, I think it was Jest style components. This is the serializer that we had to add there. Most of this code is originally from this library, but it had to be changed slightly and tweaked, especially since it was right after the version 5 update for style components. And again, I'm not going to go over this code, but basically it goes over the internals of style components, grabs the hashes that is generating, and then removes it from the final HTML. So instead of having this in the snapshot, you end up with this. The good thing here is that you have much more stable snapshots, and when they fail, when the tests fail, there's something really wrong with the structure or the logic, or maybe if it wasn't an intended change, you do have to update it. But in either case, code review would catch any other issues. But the whole point of this is to say that once the team gets used to running Jest with -u, those snapshot tests can be kind of, they don't really make any sense to be there. Because you're just updating them every time and you're not using them as a reference. So that's if you're using snapshot tests and you're trusting them, this really shouldn't be something that you do, just run -u every time. But just generally on the snapshot testing, like if it's not something that the team is taking a lot of value out, or if you are able to get a lot of confidence out of tests that are not snapshot tests, that's absolutely fine. You just need to talk with the team and decide what the best strategy for that. So just quickly on when you should be running the tests then. Jest is an automated tool. So you could, first option, easy, no setup needed. You just have the developers running them locally, which everyone should be doing anyway as part of the development process. But ideally, you should be kind of enforcing those tests being run, kind of like you do with linting and type checking usually. So one option is just to have Git hooks, right? Fairly easy setup, not a lot of work. So those tests usually don't take too much time. You could have, for example, the test running before a push or before a commit. A couple of problems in there. One is a lot of people don't really like Git hooks, but the main one is that you can very easily skip them. So ideally, you should have a version option 1 as well. So everyone should be running the test locally as part of the development process or integrated with their IDE. But you should have those in a continuous integration setup. If your project doesn't have one, that's another call out. You should really have a CI/CD setup, not just for these checks, tests, linting, and everything, but also for automated deployments, right? But that's another topic. And naturally, that CI/CD environment could host the end-to-end tests as well, especially because they're usually much slower tests. They would take a few minutes to run, and it's horrible to have those running every time locally as well. And then finally, Jest allows you many different ways to customize your experience with it. So there's all kinds of extensions for matching, for the terminal reporters, for coverage reporters, and many other things. I don't actually know if this is something that is a thing in other language communities. It's definitely something in the JavaScript one, where you have something like a tool and then an awesome repo before that. So for example, if you're studying, I don't know, Svelte, there's surely a few repositories named awesome Svelte, where you find a lot of different stuff and extensions and libraries for that tool. So for Jest, for example, we have a lot of custom matchers, IDE integrations, ESLint plugins, which are very interesting to use, all kinds of things. So for example, if you want to run your test with a very minimal terminal output, or maybe you want even more information in the terminal, you could do that. You could suppress logs, you could do a lot of stuff. I will mention a couple of things that we have in Vetterline Booking. One is a JUnit integration. It's not for JUnit itself. It's just that a way for Jest to export the testing data into a JUnit XML file. And then GitLab, which is our Git platform, has an integration to grab that and then show some info in the repository. So show stuff like this. This is just a section of a larger report. So I have a PR open, or a merge request, as they say, and all of the tests have lines like these. And for example, we have information about how much time it took. So if you have slower tests, for example, they become very easy to spot. The Kubernetes integration is also very interesting. I added GitHub as an item there as well, because there is one extension that does that directly for GitHub. But this is another GitLab integration where you can export a file and then upload it as a job artifact in GitLab. And then it will give you this information on the right here. So it will tell you which lines are covered directly in the diff. So it's very useful for code review. As you're looking at the code for someone else's merge request, you're immediately seeing that, for example, something is not being covered in, you can call it out immediately. But again, there's all kinds of different things and extensions and stuff that help you to deal with that. In Vetterline Booking specifically, we're getting actually pretty good coverage levels. It's something that I mentioned last week. It's not something that you shoot for, like over 90% coverage or anything. But these things, all of these things help in kind of keeping you in check. And for example, not merging merge requests that have that are getting the coverage down or something like that. But again, in this repository, you find a lot of information on that. One extra thing that I did want to mention is just on end-to-end tests. They can also be very interesting. So initially in the projects, we had only our integration and unit tests. But it was really interesting when we got a QA engineer, Gustavo, who was able to then develop some Cypress tests. That's another thing that you guys can try to invest some time in, maybe. But just to call it out, that is a much different kind of investment where there's a lot of time into configuring it to run, not just locally to write the test, but also to run in the CI. All of that stuff takes extra effort, which is why we needed a QA engineer for that. But it can also be very interesting. I've also been in teams where that was developed by the dev team as well. There's nothing like too complex in there either. But all right, that was it for today. Actually, much shorter talk for a couple of reasons. One of them is that I wanted to have all the integration test stuff last week, but also to open some more time today for any questions, discussions that we might want to do. Before that, actually, I do want to mention that I was trying to already get ready another couple of talks on accessibility, But if you guys have any other topics that you want to talk about, or anyone else wants to have those talks made, just let us know. We can discuss on the JavaScript channel as well. But again, just wanted to open for any questions or discussions that anyone might have. If you don't, then you will get like 10 minutes back.
Yeah, I just have one question. You mentioned, for example, that there are some people were introducing bugs because they were just doing just-u to update their snapshot, and like, hey, you're not even noticing that some button is missing now. But isn't it better to have that test on a unit test, searching for that button, or even on an end-to-end test? Because then you wouldn't need someone to notice. It would just be automatically. It would be automatically spotted, right? So I'm just asking because I'm the person that said that I don't see value on snapshot testings, and that's just another reason for that, right?
Sure. Yeah, this specific case was as a result of the overall page logic. So it would integrate with a bunch of stuff, including API requests, and that's why the button was gone. So in this case, for example, let's say you found that bug, you could have one test that only touches that and checks if the button exists specifically. That's a very useful thing to do with testing in general. But yeah, and this case was, it was a symptom of a larger problem, given that, we had those massive snapshot updates. But as you mentioned, like you could do something different for that case specifically, but it was something that was caused specifically on an integration case. It wouldn't be called necessarily in a simpler unit test.
Yeah, makes sense.
Someone raised their hand.
Hello, can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, so I just wanted to comment a bit about on this because I feel it's something like I struggled in the past, and actually like I wasn't doing with React, but I think like the principle is the same. Whenever you go on a higher level for your components, like if you go to pages or templates or maybe a complex feature, I feel that the snapshot testing begins to lose its value because of the how much effort that you need to put so that you can actually take a snapshot of that time. So if you think on a menu component that it's like fully responsive and like this menu has like a lot of components inside of it, if you think on like something like a shallow render, it's not going to help you that much, because like you're going to take a picture when the menu is open, when the menu is closed, and like that's going to completely change the HTML. So one of the suggestions that I have is like if you follow the atomic design principle, as soon as you have like modules and atoms, those are the ones who you probably want to be snapshot testing because like they are not going to change that often. At least like that's how I feel about it. As if you compare it to a menu, and also like critical and like important components, such as like if you have like a checkout component that is really sensitive, so you may want to use snapshotting for that. But as I said, I feel it makes a lot more sense when you're dealing like with components and you want those components like to be extremely small, and you want like the snapshot testing just to make sure that like by passing the correct props, you're getting the correct render, in the end, like snapshot, I feel like one of the core values is this idea of keep tracking on changes. So it makes a lot of sense like for people who are building libraries, and it makes like less sense for people who are using those libraries to build like smaller components and like profiles and this kind of stuff.
Right. Yeah. One thing is, and this is something that I did on that point. So for example, if I was testing a larger page and there's this nav bottom component in there, there's fairly complex, and I didn't want it in the snapshots. There is a way for you, for example, for you to just run an empty div in that case to get the snapshot a little bit smaller. But overall, like the strategy with snapshots is not necessarily that it's like a rule or anything. Not even close to that, right? It is something that I've gotten a lot of value out of, but I'm like perfectly open to changing that strategy in the future if needed. It's something that I mentioned last week, I think, as well. Like, all of this is pretty new stuff. There's no like nothing really set in stone, and the community and the knowledge that we have is evolving over time. So yeah, all that perspective that you guys are bringing is definitely something that I've taken into account as well in the past. And like, depending on what kind of project, I might have a different strategy. There's this project that was in the Vetpoint squad as well, which was called SOC. I don't remember if eventually I went for snapshots, but I know at least initially I didn't use them. I don't remember the exact reason, but again, like, it depends on the situation, as I mentioned, and the architecture of the projects.
Perfect. Also, like, something that I think like it's nice to comment is like about this evolution that you've mentioned. Like, React hooks has been like a feature on React like from a long time, and the composition API on Vue 3, it's like something new. You know, like it doesn't have the same time as this one, and like they've created like new ways of testing hooks and new ways of testing that for Vue. You know, so that's also something that I feel like it's really helpful. You know, for you guys to take in consideration. And last thing, it's like whenever you're going to test like complex events, that's also something like that it really bugs you on unit testing, because like you have all the HTML element, like all the properties that maybe you're going to use TypeScript, okay, inside the DOM, and you're going to need to use them so that you can identify which is these events. So just to get it more clear, like I tried testing like a drag and drop on unit testing, like and it's like a completely chaos, you know, because there's so poor documentation on that at a time, and right now it's way better, you know. So this is definitely going to evolve over time. But the main point is like when we start testing, like things start like working better, you know. You get more confident on your application. So I feel like everything you showed, it's really important, and from there, like we can use the groups to, you know, get deeper into that.
For sure. Yeah. And let's keep the discussion going and that channel as well. I want to hear you guys' experience for sure. All right. Anyone else?
Yeah, just kind of a side topic.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Fernando. Yeah, just real quick, as a side topic, in terms of CI, I know that not every team has set it up, and it is something that not all teams have the experience with. So if you want to, in any of your squads, if you want some help understanding CI, how to set it up, good practices and so on, reach out, right, in one of our channels, or reach out to me directly, and we can try and help there. That's it, Fernando.
Great, thank you, Jean Paul. Now, just wanted to thank you, Abdiel, a lot for those talks, and also encourage anyone that wants have subjects or things they want to share with the rest of us. Please feel free. We really love to have those conversations about technology and about anything else. So yeah, I just wanted to thank you, Abdiel, and encourage all of you guys to do the same. It would be awesome to see you.
And like, even if you don't want to talk about the topic that is kind of broad, like testing, for example, if you've gone through a very successful, I don't know, refactoring in the system, and you want to show to everyone else, you know, trying to avoid private code and everything, but just sharing experiences, that kind of thing is also very interesting.
Yeah, totally. Okay,
well,
thank you very much.
In my case, this snapshot is going to be useful since I'm just grasping the first steps on this. So thank you for sharing, man. I really appreciate all this. I mean, this is your experience. So I think the idea for you sharing this is because you want to give us like a early start for the beginners like us. Thank you, man.
Sure. Yeah, and again, like anyone else who has experiences, if you guys want to share that as well, I'd be happy to hear that. All right. If there's no one else, I think we can end here.
One last thing.
Sure.
I was just going to comment this, but I completely forgot. There's also like some strategies when you want to test the UI. So I'm pretty sure like maybe you guys know about Storybook and visual regression testing. You know, it's a way that you can compare the UI just from the UI perspective. So like you can check how is the actual design for your components and what is the new one. And basically what it does, like I use these like in a no library scenario. So like I take a snapshot of the home page and then I compare with the new home page, and that uses like shows how this one is different from this one. You know, I'm pretty sure like these tools also integrate well with React, Vue, and all those front-end libraries. But this is also a way of keep track and testing your application. You know, because this visual regression, it's probably like helping the QAs. You know, because you actually see the components. You're not just writing code about it. And Storybook is also really nice because it serves as a documentation for new people who are going to use your components, who are going to mess up with your project and going to build new stuff. So it's really important, like also considering those tools. But as I said, like congratulations for your introduction, man. And I'm really excited for next week.
Sure. And again, if you guys have ideas of other topics or if you guys want to share yourselves, let us know. All right, we're just over time, so I think we can end it here.